Hello everybody, and welcome back. Today we are diving into Chapter 10, Sales Contracts and Related Procedures. And this is one of the most important chapters for both the real estate exam and real life. Chapter 9 and Chapter 10, there's a lot of overlap. They go hand in hand because here's the truth. Real estate doesn't happen without contracts, and contracts controls the price, the timelines, the due diligence, the earnest money, who owes what, and what happens if someone backs out. And if you don't understand contracts, you can get your clients, yourself, into serious trouble. So in this video, we're going to break down the North Carolina offer to purchase and contract, due diligence, earnest money, communication of acceptance, counteroffers, the statute of frauds, trust monies, option contracts, and contract terms you must know for the exam. And remember, this video is not just about memorizing exam questions. I want you to actually understand how contracts work in real life. But I'll also point out key testable concepts, common exam traps, and vocabulary that the state loves to ask about. So grab the worksheet in the link below and let's jump in to Chapter 10. Why contracts matter. A sales contract creates a legally binding agreement between a buyer and a seller. This document explains who the parties are, the property is being sold, the purchase price, deadlines, obligations, and what happens if someone defaults. In North Carolina, attorneys draft contracts. This is a very important exam point. Real estate brokers in North Carolina cannot draft legal documents, cannot practice law, but brokers can fill in blanks on pre-printed forms created by the attorneys. This way, brokers use standard forms like the NCAR, North Carolina Real Estate Commission, or North Carolina Associate Realtors, and NCBA, North Carolina Board of Attorneys, or Bar of Attorneys, offer to purchase and contract Form 2T. The statute of frauds, one of the biggest exam concepts in this chapter is the statute of frauds. The statute of frauds said contracts involving real estate must be in writing to be enforceable. So if someone says, I verbally agree to buy the house, that is not enforceable in court. The exam alert question here is that the statute of frauds requires contracts for the sale of real property to be in writing to be enforceable. So with offers, acceptance, and counteroffers, this also is a tested topic in Chapter 10. So let's simplify it. Offer. An offer is when one party proposes terms to another party. For example, I'll buy your house for $400,000. Acceptance. Acceptance occurs when the offeree signs the offer exactly as it is written. Key words, without change. Because if anything changes in that offer, it becomes a counter offer. And we remember that a counter offer rejects the original offer, kills the original offer, and creates a brand new offer. For example, a buyer offers $400,000 with $1,000 in earnest money. Seller agrees to everything except the earnest money and wants to change it to $4,000. That is not acceptance. That is a counter offer. So now let's talk about communication of acceptance. This is one of the hardest concepts for students to understand. A contract is not binding just because both parties signed it. Acceptance must be communicated. The contract becomes binding when acceptance is communicated to the other side, not just when it's signed, not just when it's printed, but when it is communicated. So for example, a buyer signs on Monday, seller signs on Tuesday morning. Listing agent calls buyer agent Tuesday evening and says, The seller has accepted. Bingo! That's it right there. The contract became binding Tuesday evening, not when buyer heard about it Wednesday morning. So let's talk a little bit about the mailbox rule. That's the deliverance rule. The mailbox rule says acceptance is effected when it is sent, not received. So if an agent emails acceptance, the moment they hit send, communication occurred. This is super testable. So part of the contract is due diligence. Welcome to one of the most important concepts in North Carolina real estate. North Carolina is unique because we use due diligence. Due diligence is the buyer's opportunity to investigate the property. The investigation could include inspections, surveys, financing. They can review HOA rules, zoning permits, appraisals, septic. They could look at everything. The buyer can terminate during that due diligence period for any reason or for no reason at all. And so the due diligence fee is negotiable, and it is paid directly to the seller. Becomes the seller's money immediately upon the effective date of this contract. And so the due diligence fee is usually not refundable unless the seller materially breaches the contract. And so in real world example here, buyer pays $1,500 in due diligence fee, $5,000 in earnest money. Buyer changes his mind during the due diligence period. So what happens? The seller keeps that due diligence fee. The buyer gets the earnest money back. This is a very common exam question. So let's talk a little bit about the earnest money. Earnest money shows the buyer's seriousness to purchase the home. So earnest money goes into a trust account held by a brokerage or an attorney. It is refundable during the due diligence period, and it is credited to the buyer at closing. And so since the due diligence is given to the seller and the earnest money is given to the trust account or put into a trust account, what are the trust account rules? North Carolina has very strict trust account rules. Earnest money goes into a trust account, regardless if it's an attorney or a brokerage that's holding it. Due diligence fee never goes into a trust account. So the timing rule with earnest money is if it's paid by check, must be deposited within 3 banking days after acceptance. Remember, 3 banking days, not consecutive calendar days. Let's talk a little bit about executorial versus executed contract. We hit on this in chapter 9, but this is a big vocabulary word here. Executorial contract means obligations still remain. Most real estate contracts are executorial until closing because buyer still has to pay and seller still has to transfer title. Executed contract means everybody completed their obligation. Closing has happened. Money is transferred and title is transferred. It is done. It has been executed. Let's talk a little bit about option contracts, although not that common in North Carolina, but still something that we need to know. An option contract gives someone the right to buy property within a certain time period, but the buyer is not obligated to buy. The seller is obligated to sell if the option is exercised. So an option contract requires consideration, meaning money or something of value. So imagine this situation here. A homeowner is thinking about selling their property, but the buyer isn't ready to purchase yet because they are waiting on financing or trying to sell another home. So the buyer says, I want the right to buy your house within the next 60 days for $400,000. The seller agrees. The buyer pays the seller a $2,000 option fee. Now here's the important part. During those 60 days, the seller cannot sell the property to someone else. The buyer has the option to buy that property, but the buyer is not required to buy that property. The buyer changes their mind and they walk away. The seller keeps that $2,000 option fee. The buyer loses that option fee, but is not forced to buy that house. So let's understand some key points here. Option contracts require consideration, and that's usually money. Seller is obligated to sell if buyer exercises that option. Buyer is not obligated to purchase. Option equals right without obligation. Let's talk a little bit now about installment land contracts, also called contract for deed. A buyer makes payments directly to the seller over a period of time, and seller keeps legal title until it's fully paid. Things to consider: this can be a high-risk transaction. Imagine a buyer wants to purchase a home for $250,000, but they cannot qualify for a traditional mortgage right now. So the seller is getting a bank loan. So instead of getting a bank loan, the seller agrees to finance the property directly. So with this scenario, terms of this agreement could be purchase price of $250,000, down payment $10,000, monthly payments of $1,800. Payment period is for 10 years. The buyer moves into the home immediately and start making payment directly to the seller. Now here's an important part. During that payment period, buyer gets possession of the property, gets equitable title and right to occupy that property. But the seller keeps legal title and ownership rights until they are paid in full. So what happens at the end? Owner gets the buyer. Once the buyer finishes all payments, seller transfers the legal title with the deed. Now the buyer becomes full legal owner. Now here's the risk of it. Installment land contracts can be risky for the buyer because if the buyer defaults, buyer may keep the payments already made. They may retake possession of that property, and buyer may lose equity that they built up in that property. Let's talk a little bit about preemptive rights. Two important vocabulary terms: right of first refusal. Owner gets opportunity to match another offer before seller accepts it. A right of first refusal means the owner can sell the property to someone else. But before accepting another offer, they must give a specific person the chance to match that offer, such as a tenant rents a home. The owner decides to sell and gets offer for $400,000. The tenant has a right of first refusal. So the owner asks, do you want to buy it for $400,000? The tenant can match it or they can decline it and move on. Right of first opportunity. Party gets first chance to negotiate before seller markets the property. So right of first opportunity means the owner must give someone the first chance to negotiate before offering the property to the public. A farmer wants a first chance to negotiate to buy land of his neighbor before it becomes available. Before the seller lists the property, the seller first must negotiate with the farmer. If they cannot agree, then the seller then may market the property to others. Now here's something huge in North Carolina. Unauthorized practice of law. Brokers, we cannot draft special provisions. We cannot create legal clauses, and we cannot practice law. If legal language is needed, you need to refer to an attorney. So real-world contract advice, this isn't just exam stuff. This is real life. A tiny contract mistake can kill a deal and cost money, create lawsuits, and create ethic complaints. Contract license discipline. This is why communication matters, deadlines matter, and documentations matter, and why great agents stay organized. So let's look at some key takeaway review here. Let's review the big concepts. Statute of frauds equals contract must be in writing. A counteroffer kills the original offer. Contracts become binding upon communication of acceptance. Due diligence fee goes directly to the seller. Earnest money goes into a trust account. Earnest money deposit within 3 banking days after acceptance. Buyer can terminate during the due diligence period. Executory, not fully performed. Executed is complete. Everyone has no more obligations. Brokers cannot practice law. So here are some focused vocabulary words for the exams. You will find this in the worksheet that's in the description below. So key terms that you want to know is statute of frauds, due diligence fee, earnest money, executory contracts, executed contract, counteroffer, communication of acceptance, option contracts, liquidated damages, trust account, right of first refusal, and installment land contracts. So for questions for you, for students, when does a contract become binding? What happens when a counteroffer is made? What is refundable during due diligence period? Where does earnest money go? Does due diligence fee go into a trust account? What does the statute of frauds require? What is the difference between executorial and executed? What is an option contract? Can brokers draft legal language? And what is the mailbox rule? All right, everyone, this wraps up chapter 10. This chapter is extremely important for the real estate exam and your real estate career, because contracts are the foundation of every transaction. Now, if you like this video, hit the like button below and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to check out the downloadable worksheet. A lot of great information there. And as always, feel free to reach out, and I'll be looking out for you for the next chapter, chapter 11. And remember, I am here to help you from licensing to close.